Hi, I'm Erin.
And I'm Melissa.
And our treasure is this photograph. It's the construction of Basin number 4 of the Lachine Canal, taken by Samuel McLaughlin. According to Library and Archives Canada, it was taken circa 1877. But after speaking to the lovely people at the National Historic Site Division of Parks Canada, we discovered Basin number 4 was actually only built between 1884 and 1886. This was the first mystery we ran into when researching this project. But more about mysteries later. Let me tell you about Samuel McLaughlin. He was born in Ireland in 1826. In 1861, he became the first official photographer for the province of Canada. As art historians, this tells us when the government fully accepted and realized the uses of photography. We don't know the actual context of this photograph, but since McLaughlin worked for the public works, we can suppose that most of his photography, including this image of the construction of the basin, was taken for the purposes of documentation. He is best known for the documentation of the construction of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. This would lead us to believe that the image documents the building process. However, if one delves into the history of Montreal at the time, they would certainly read about the workers' strike of 1877, which affected projects like the canal. None of the men in the picture look much like workers with their fancy hats and long coats on. Perhaps the image is documenting the strike. Mel will explain the importance of this canal to Montreal.
The building of the Canadian canal system changed how Montreal was viewed on a local, national, and international level. As settlers came from all directions to claim part of the Americas, one section in the Montreal area that always seemed to be a pain to work around were the Lachine Rapids. These rapids made transportation and travel very difficult and dangerous. Around 1670, the French colonial government were the first to put forth the idea to build a massive canal system that would cut through the southwest part of the island of Montreal, as a means to go around the nasty Lachine Rapids. But over 140 years later, not much had been done. It was only in 1821 when Thomas Brunet, John Redpath, John Richardson, and Thomas McKay, to name a few, took over the dream to build the Lachine Canal. Between 1820 and 1850, Montreal received many immigrating families from all over the globe. The Irish who were escaping the potato famine were particularly numerous. Most moved to Victoriaville, Griffintown, and Point St. Charles. These towns flanked the canal. Most found employment with the building of the canal, but the working conditions for the canal workers were far from sanitary and fair. In 1843, the canal riots started. The riot resulted in about 20 workers being killed, the working day reduced to 10 hours, and wages were raised to $1 a day. By 1885, the canal was completed. When the canal did open, over 600 different types of industries flourished around the new waterway. One of the very exciting features that made the canal possible was the introduction and use of hydraulic power. The hydraulic power would repower the ships and power the machinery that was used to load and unload the ships. Around the 1850s, the canal could no longer support the amount of traffic and the sizable ships. Because of this, the St. Lawrence Seaway was opened. By the 1970s, both the canal and the canal companies no longer had a purpose. At present, there are several companies who still operate just off the canal, 12 of which have weathered through it all and are still in operation. In 2002, after a little reconstruction, the canal was reopened again, but this time it was purely for recreational use. The Lachine Canal stretches over 14 kilometers from Lac Saint-Louis to the Old Port of Montreal. It is used by pleasure craft owners, kayaking clubs, and a dragon boat club. Joggers, walkers, and cyclists enjoy the paths that run along the side of the canal. Most of the old industrial buildings have now been converted into small business offices and condos. At present, there is even a plan in motion to completely rebuild Griffintown. Many are against the plan. They feel it is important to preserve the space as a historical site than to cover the site with more condos and shopping malls.
Thanks for that history bite, Mel. Now, back to our image. As I was mentioning before, we don't know the context of this image. It could have been used for survey books like this one, merely for documentary purposes, or in a photographic publication. This last option is fairly likely since Samuel McLaughlin was the creator of Canada's first photographic publication, the Photographic Portfolio. Little information can be found on this journal. In fact, there's very few records at all about Samuel McLaughlin beyond some census information, baptismal certificates of his many children, and a small nod for his photographs of the Parliament building constructions in a few books. It seems strange for a man of multiple firsts to be swallowed by history. We assume the reason for this invisibility lies in a paragraph we found in this book describing the loss of his studio and records in a fire. In summation, we feel this photograph is a Canadian treasure for many reasons. For one, it's a beautifully composed photograph with detailed areas of light and dark. But it's more than that. It is an image of a truly monumental Canadian feat, the building of the Lachine Canal, which had a major impact on Montreal and Canada. Besides the subject matter, it was taken by a photographer who holds a title to a number of firsts. Samuel McLaughlin was first photographer for the Canadian government and created the first Canadian photographic publication. In a time when the premier Canadian photographers like William Notman and James Inglis were constructing elaborate realities in their studios, our photograph of the construction of Basin No. 4 of the Lachine Canal gives us insight into a Canada we could not understand unless we had been there, and that is why we think it is a Canadian treasure.